In the cold of a Glasgow November, the world tried to make more progress towards a net zero world. The Consultation Institute believes that this is only possible with significant public engagement and consultation. But it raises enormous questions. There are so many different aspects, affecting such a broad range of stakeholders and in so many different ways. Much depends upon perspectives. Everyone has a stake in the planet, and there cannot be one-size-fits-all solutions. That goes for science, the politics, and for the ways we engage with the public. So we went to Glasgow to ask campaigners and sought experts from all over the world. They came from far and wide.
I've come to COP to understand how the trends and the decisions that we are taking today as a collective community and international community are going to set us off on trajectories regarding economic growth, regarding democratic resilience, regarding collective solidarity in the face of climate disruptions.
For many people, it's all about the future. Indeed, Wales is the only country in the world to have legislated to protect the interests of future generations.
We're here in COP discussing a climate crisis because we haven't had intergenerational thinking in our decision making. We have passported problems onto future generations. We've acted in the here and now. We work on short-term budget cycles, short-term political cycles, and so on. There are very many issues where we failed the good ancestor test. And the Future Generations Act in Wales is an internationally unique piece of legislation, provides a framework that the rest of the world could follow to ensure that we put that problem in our systems of governance right. We know that if government are going to take the brave and robust action that they need to take in order to reach net zero, there's going to be some big changes to people's lives. There's going to be changes to the way they travel, changes to the way they work, changes to the way they power their homes, changes to the way that communities look and feel. But there's also going to be some challenges around things like retrofitting energy efficiency measures in our homes, new boilers, and that will come with a cost.
Eloise Shikau of Regions 4, a network of regional governments, echoes this idea.
The first impacted by climate change is the people, is the citizens. So it's through their voice that you can show the impact and how they are already taking steps to respond to climate change. But there are local solutions that many people have had to take. Obviously, the role of a regional government is to do this bottom-up effect of really listening to the people, then coordinating mechanisms to hear them, to plan with them, and to implement, and then show how they're doing that to the national governments and to the international arena. I was talking actually to Wales recently, and they were mentioning that actually when you're dealing with, for example, a flood, it's in the closest knit communities that you find the best solutions, because in a way they have already mechanisms, informal sometimes, to respond to an emergency.
It seems that so many at Glasgow agree that whatever is decided by governments, behaviour change is often a function of local issues. When extreme weather events occur, it is often too late. What the politicians call mitigation may provide financial and other assistance, but many see the priority being in preventative measures, like mobilising communities to drive the change towards renewable energies. Dirk van Sint-Jan is president of the European Federation of Citizen Energy Cooperatives. We caught him between meetings in Glasgow.
If people are not involved, if they can't participate and also harvest the profits of renewables in their neighborhood, they will oppose it. So it's really crucial in the fight against climate change that everyone's on board. There's a huge potential in what citizens can do privately and collectively in the energy communities. We had a study done by CE Delft from the Netherlands, and this showed that by 2050, about half of the electricity we need then might be produced by citizens at home or collectively in their neighborhood with energy cooperatives.
The challenge seems to be in bringing all the parties together: technologists, financiers, municipal authorities, as well as communities. That's a role taken by the Paris-based REN21 organisation. In fact, it calls itself a community of actors with a mission. we spoke to Leah Ronaldo.
Everything is centered around fossil fuels. Our entire economy, our cities, and how we as a society function. And we want to shift this to a renewable-based society and economy. And that needs deep changes. That needs bringing, not only working on the political level, but not only working on the market level, but also working on the community and the citizen level, getting civil society on board, getting different stakeholders on board. And we want to make that transition, that deep structural transition that is needed, happen.
It is no different in Australia. Peter Newman has been active in the field of sustainability for 3 decades and has described to us how long it has taken for the idea to be fully grasped.
Sustainability is something that does mean something at a local level and regional level, because energy and water and waste and transport and planning, they all affect the whole region, and it's in a way easier to deal with than on a whole state basis or a whole nation basis. Australia as a geography is one of the places that ought to have been leading the world in this. And at state level, you can find that leadership. There are seriously good things happening on that front. Sydney and Fremantle have had carbon neutral policies for 5 years in Fremantle's case, 10 years in Sydney's case. They're inner city, central city areas that are heavily populated with professionals and people who feel very strongly about the environment, and have had a lot of experience with their councils on developing policies that are as good as anywhere in the world.
Leah Ronaldo confirms this idea that cities can often lead the way.
And I think we're often underestimating what city governments can do, because they're much closer to the residents living in their cities. Amsterdam has just done some mapping and asked the people for their opinion on the urban energy transition. I live in Paris. A couple of weeks ago, I got to vote on some part of the municipal budget. So, I had the choice to highlight topics that I personally think are important.
There are trials and attempts across the world, not just in Europe, not just in the United States. Actually, there are consultations involving citizens, young people, older people or elderlies, different, private sector actors, civil society actors, to try and see what an actual transition should look like. Rather in terms of city behaviors regarding resource use, regarding consumption and productivist patterns, and how we can move towards more resilient cities.
The challenge is dramatically different in Africa. Poor countries find millions of their citizens have to place survival as top of their agendas. Many of them, for example in the Sahel, already suffer the consequences of climate change. But it is still important to reduce their society's dependence upon fossil fuels. Ayuba Hassan works in Nigeria.
What we do at EdPoint Development Services is to try to build energy-efficient homes such that we are able to mitigate the excessive use of energy and try to reduce fossil fuel and electricity, like using solar-powered solutions for our housing estates. We try to change their lifestyle. Our houses are designed in such a way that they wouldn't need to put on power during the daytime, because you would have all the doors, the windows openings big enough to give them enough energy during the day, and they don't need to go using the traditional electricity methods in order to get lighting into the houses.
No matter where, the emphasis is on communicating effectively with local communities.
When you talk about adaptation, you talk about resilience. So when we ask a regional government to do an adaptation plan, the first action that we ask them is to do a vulnerability assessment with their populations. So it has to start with a consultation with the local population. I think actually if most regional governments have public engagement, and I'll take the example of the Basque Country, where they've launched a program that's called Urban Klima, large-scale communication to the local population, but also working groups, information at the very local level, like the different villages on what is climate, what was happening at the COP, making sure that they consulted in the different projects that are being undertaken. So it's one example with the Basque Country, but actually if you look at France, if you look at Italy, Lombardy, there's extensive programs to involve the local population.
So, there's a great deal of public engagement going ahead, more than we realise, and often at local levels, below the radar. It is harder in some places than others, so that in almost every country, people who are becoming aware of the dangers of climate change are becoming active. Their reasons will differ. Back to Nigeria once again.
People have different reasons why climate change is important to them, but they are all committed to getting global leaders to take action. So when government come around and say, oh, it's going to flood in the next 1 month, 2 months, you people along river basin, you need to move to where? So when government say, don't cut down that tree because we need it to balance the ecosystem, use some other source of energy for making your food, and there's a woman who needs to boil water for her to make pap for her crying baby. For her, she needs an answer now. So when you don't have alternative for her, every other thing you're talking, persuading her to protect the environment, it falls on deaf ears, not because she doesn't care, but because it's an existential issue for her.
Time after time, we hear that individual motivations may differ, but the overall picture is the same and was summarised succinctly by Dr. Elif Selen of Turkey.
There's a huge gap between ordinary people and diplomats, lawmakers. They should focus on more what ordinary people are thinking. Lawmakers should coordinate more with indigenous and ordinary people, especially in terms of climate change.
Some countries claim they have got the message. Peter McCall works with the Consultation Institute in Scotland and expresses some optimism.
We've moved on from debating whether it's something that needs action to debating what kind of action we need. That means us listening much more carefully to people about the trade-offs that we're going to face in doing that over the coming years.
But how best to engage with such diverse populations? What are the best mechanisms? When to deploy them? Who is best to organise them? One of the most significant fringe meetings in Glasgow was with the Climate Engagement Network, organised through the Simon Fraser Centre for Dialogue in Vancouver. A few weeks later, we caught up with Robin Prest, the programme director.
Although there are many really effective engagement processes being used, we need to be engaging at every level of the system. It can be deliberative things like climate assemblies, place-based engagement like green participatory budgeting that's bringing people in to understand how climate change is affecting them on their road, on their street. And it needs to have learning built in so that elected officials and politicians are hearing from citizens, who are hearing from scientists, who are hearing from stakeholders in an ongoing iterative conversation.
The use of the term conversation will resonate with many people. It prompted Peter Newman to reflect on his involvement with many such initiatives.
There were 42 other deliberative democracy exercises, and they were often done where you need citizen juries or something like that, and generally seen to be very successful, but they take time. The agencies prefer to do something they're controlling by themselves rather than having this group of people come in that the minister wants to see. We've had citizen assemblies. Our Prime Minister had one, Kevin Rudd, when he was elected, and it was treated with scorn by the media. Those who went thought it was fantastic, but the product from it was pretty minimal. It may well have had deeper cultural change that flowed through in various ways, but I've never seen anything that evaluated it very positively. And they have to be seen to be, by the politicians involved, committed to that they will find the resources no matter what you find. That kind of commitment is very rare for a politician to make.
No one should underestimate the scale of the challenge some places face to totally re-engineer their infrastructures. When we spoke to one of India's foremost experts on climate change, Professor Jyoti Parikh, her reasoning was persuasive.
India is now beginning to have transportation revolution in some sense. But unless city is organized in a way that citizens can do their business without emitting, greenhouse gases, sometimes it's not possible. For example, if city has more public transport driven by, let's say, electric trains, then it is and it's well managed, then they don't have to drive their own vehicles. For every car, perhaps we have more than 10 two-wheelers. So two-wheelers is the way to go, and now electric mobility is taking over in two-wheelers, starting from two-wheelers in India.
You have to have the systems or the technology right and carry people with you. Even in richer countries like Canada, there are real doubts about fundamentals like energy policies. Dan Goldberger works at the Ontario Sustainability Energy Association and reflected on this challenge.
I think the public is often not as well versed in how these technologies are integrated and provide them with both baseload and peak electricity needs. And we had a number of communities that were very active and formed co-ops and shared the renewable energy savings amongst its members. The opportunity is there to create energy efficient or renewable energy technology projects, but there are no incentives per se.
He was complaining at the lack of investment in public education and public engagement. It's made more difficult when austerity, pandemics, conflicts and crises oblige public institutions to cut back on public engagement resources.
We've seen local authorities lose a lot of resources over the last 10 years. That makes things much more difficult for them. And I think we need to really give them the support and the help that they need to make sure that they're making the right decisions with the right information and the right consultation and engagement with communities and with individuals.
Perhaps engagement, involvement, participation has taken a real hit in our public bodies due to austerity. Those teams who were the people who went out and did the continual engagement with the community, with individuals, with people whose voices aren't often heard, they've tended to be stripped away. And I think, that is a complete false cost saving. But actually, if we don't invest in those areas and if we don't make sure that when we're developing policy changes to public services and so on, that they're really done with a thorough understanding of what communities want and need and what different types of communities want and need, then we're setting ourselves up to fail.
And we are possibly neglecting the most important voices of all, children and young people.
There are 2.2 billion people, it's a third of the global population that are under the age of 18. There's no way we can reach net zero if we don't start with children.
And Donna Goodman should know. She's been working in this area for years.
I started with UNICEF. By 2004, I was seeing that climate change was happening. I was able to get UNICEF to start thinking about climate change and children. When we went to the COP in Bali, the original climate change convention did not include children and young people. The children and young people constituency was officially adopted in 2009. And they would say to me, our biggest challenge is getting adults to take us seriously. You can ask them in London, you can ask them in New York, you can ask them in Florida, you can ask them in Malawi, rural India. They all say the same thing. We have trouble getting adults to take us seriously. They inherently want to be connected. They're inherently global citizens. There are billions of dollars that go to countries for adaptation, and not even 1% goes into the education sector.
Well, back at the Consultation Institute, I've been talking to Sheena Ahmed, who is our public policy specialist and has been looking at matters to do with climate change for a very long time. And I wonder, as you were looking and listening to those voices with me, Sheena, what your reactions were.
I loved the momentum generated at COP26 and the genuine desire for a range of stakeholders. So you've got industry, you've got regional, you've got community groups wanting to be involved in those decisions and help accelerate the goals of the Paris Agreement and international conventions. The perspectives that we heard were very much in line with our own experience and what we've been hearing at the Institute. So that was good to hear. Each response gave us an insight into the depth of the challenge from the international level down to the individual and the individual choices that we make. One of the key points that I picked up from Eloise at Regions 4, she mentioned behaviour change and how governments are focused on mitigation and where the priority should be on preventative measures, such as mobilising communities to drive the change towards using renewable energy. And I agree with that completely. But deep changes like the switch to renewable energy will not happen overnight, and neither will our behaviours. And that's down to a number of reasons, from financial barriers to habits to making difficult lifestyle choices. So what this requires is a long-term coordinated approach to public engagement to explore the barriers, or shall I say identify the barriers, and explore the opportunities and the motivations, and agree on the priorities and what the solutions may be. People think about behaviour change as if it's going to happen like that, but it's more of a transitional process.
It occurs to me that sometimes in the UK we think we're a little different from other countries, that maybe public perceptions are different and the challenges are different. Are they really, or are we the same as everybody else?
Not so much. They are pretty much the same. Public perception is often shaped by individual experiences, society, the media, and other information sources. Across the world, you'll see that in most countries, majority of people believe that climate change is a threat. Worldwide, you have young people demanding for a say in climate decision making, and there's this sort of climate anxiety they have. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the older people denying that climate change is happening, and so this requires an international approach to intergenerational decision making. So that's quite important. The difference is in the lived experience in terms of the extent to which climate change affects our lives. So you'll see in the UK we have floods and heat waves. Across the world we have droughts, tsunamis, earthquakes that affect cities and entire countries. That's coupled with issues like health and inequality, poverty, economic opportunities, which all have an impact on the support for policy action. So we really need to think about these issues and how we're going to address these collectively if we want to address the climate emergency right. As for the challenges, I think they're pretty much the same worldwide, excluding countries like Norway and Iceland, which are at least at threat from climate change. The challenges for me start with the politics. I think that we need stronger leadership to set national and regional objectives, and making sure that there's funding set aside, and that's continuously, for research and development, for technology and for these climate initiatives. The other challenge I can see is the approach in addressing the climate emergency and how people engage the public on these issues. And I mentioned earlier removing those barriers, so how they do that is quite important. A particular challenge that I've seen for local authorities is coordinating different policies. So you've got climate emergency happening on one end, and then you've got the levelling up agenda that is also happening all at the same time. So these initiatives need to be coordinating, as they do have similar objectives.
So what can the Consultation Institute do to help organisations both here in the UK and internationally?
The Institute offers a wide range of services, from facilitation to advice and guidance packages. Each package will be tailored to the individual needs of the organisations, taking into account the budget and the resources they have available to them. Ordinarily, a package might include managing internal and external collaboration, so that's internally coordinating the approach and externally tapping into those partnerships that already exist. The Institute can also assist in developing a continuous engagement strategy. This would include doing a stakeholder mapping exercise, ensuring that we're reaching each segment of the community. As part of this, we would also look at the range of approaches and techniques that we would employ and measuring the effectiveness of those.
Well, that's quite a lot for us to think about.
I think we have a new generation of youth that wants to have a role in the world that they're seeing, and they have lived even more than us in a world where climate change is extremely present. It's hard to sell climate change because in many ways it is unpopular in the sense that you need to take drastic actions to improve this world, right?
I think adults just have a hard time changing behavior, but these kids are born to lead this change. Kids in Connecticut would plant a tree, but they would also support the planting of a tree in Kenya. And the education that goes along with it, because Wangari always said, you can't just plant the tree, you have to make sure it survives, you have to take care of it.